If you lived in China at the moment, living under the Chinese totalitarian government, everywhere you went in that country, you would be monitored by CCTV with facial recognition. You would not have any cash. They no longer use that. They use a digital currency. And that is controlled by the Communist Party. You would have a social credit score that is monitored by the Communist Party. And depending on if your score was high or low or in the middle, wherever they deemed acceptable, you would have certain restrictions. Like, for instance, if you said something on social media about the Communist Party that they didn't like, then when you went to buy a bus ticket, you couldn't do that. If you went to buy a plane ticket to try to travel, you wouldn't be able to do that either until you changed the way you spoke. If you said other things, then you would go into your bank account and you wouldn't be able to access it because they would shut that down on you. And this exact program of surveillance, of monitoring, of watching and controlling, including the digital currency, is being rolled out throughout all the Western nations, including this one. Digital currency is already in place for the United States of America. It hasn't happened yet. Why are governments doing that? Is it because they care about us? Because they want to watch us closely, to help us? Well, we all know that's not true. Governments do this because they're trying to rule over their nation and be in charge and power over every individual, and not only over their individual lives, but what they say and do. This is why governments do this. But we need to keep in mind that this kind of totalitarian government, this kind of strategy that has been implemented, it's been implemented in China and all over the West. It's been done before. It's been done before. And it always looks like these governments are getting somewhere, like they're fulfilling their plan to control us. But these sinful efforts to take power over mankind always fail. They always fail. The Roman Empire was a totalitarian government. They ruled over the nations with an iron fist, and they monitored everyone. They had their CIA. They had their military spy networks. The Frumatari was what the CIA was known under Rome. Their job was initially to go out into the whole Roman Empire and bring in the harvest, the wheat harvest. They went and monitored what you were growing, and of course you were going to be taxed. Well, the Romans realized quite quickly, we've got a network of people throughout the empire who would be very useful spies. So that's what their job was. If you wrote a letter under the Roman government, they would be monitoring it. There's instances where the Caesar had direct information about a husband and wife's relationship because she wrote him a letter complaining that he wasn't spending enough time with him. The man is an official. He comes to Caesar and says, I would like to change position. He says, no, what you need to do is you need to spend more time with your wife. And the man was shocked. How did he know that? And he says, has my wife been complaining to you as well? We need to understand that the Romans were just as bad as any and worse than any totalitarian government, including their IRS. They've got mountains of old wine jars that the Romans would individually mark as they came through the harbor for the people to pay taxes, mountains of them. They had a whole machine monitoring everything. And the reason is that they wanted, of course, to get their money, but they wanted total control and power over their people and over the whole world, and they failed at it. They failed at it. Now, today, the governments that we've talked about, doesn't matter if it's the Russians, the Chinese, doesn't matter if it's in Brussels who are trying to create a United States of Europe, doesn't matter if it's in this country, are trying to do the same thing. And someone says, but now they have artificial intelligence. Now they've got AI, and they do. And they're all competing to create the best AI, and they're listening to artificial intelligence. Because AI is meant to have all of the wisdom and all of the knowledge of science and all of the knowledge that's come from every other human endeavor. They've programmed that in there. It searches the internet. It pulls up all of the data. It processes it. They sit before it and say, what should we do next? And it tells them what to do. But what they forget is this. It's created by man. And man's an idiot. So they've created a super idiot that they're all listening to. See, you can ask AI, what is going to be the result of this upcoming election? Or who's running for this upcoming election? And he can get that thing can give you all the data, tell you all the history. But you ask AI who's going to win this upcoming election? Doesn't know. We have built AI in the image of man. We've built ourselves a super idiot to listen to. But they're listening to it to try to grasp power, and it will, like all the rest, it will fail. It will fail like all of those other kingdoms. But election time is coming. And it's coming quickly. We are on the cusp, so to speak. And things are going to be happening quite quickly. Does God know the result of this election? How do we know that God knows the result of this upcoming election? Well, the text that Liam read for us today in Daniel 7, 1 through 18, and I strongly urge you to get into the likes of Daniel and the prophets at this time, because they saw exactly the same thing happening in the world. But in Daniel 7, 1 through 18, God lays out to Daniel the future. And he lays out that 4 kingdoms are coming. The Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar, the Medo-Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, and then he goes to that ugliest monster of all, the Roman Empire, and he mentions that there's 10 horns. That's going to be the 10 Caesars that the Roman Empire had. God, in one text, one vision to Daniel, lays out 600 years of history in one vision. And he lays it out in detail up into the birth of Christ, his eternal kingdom that will never be destroyed. Do you know what that's like? That's like Columbus discovered the country in 1492. Imagine someone in 1423 in this country, 1423, laying out the detailed history of this country, going through the War of Independence, George Washington, the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, and up to Donald Trump. Imagine that. Imagine someone did that back then. That's what God is doing with Daniel here. Do you think he knows what's going to happen in 9 days? For sure he knows. And we need to keep in mind, we need to keep this in mind. Consider how God looks at world leaders and superpowers. To that vision in Daniel 7, he describes empires as kind of weird monsters. And he describes the great kings, not in that text, but another text in Daniel, and he describes them as farm animals who are very angry. Alexander the Great, he's an angry goat. Is an angry goat a problem? You wouldn't want to get in front of it. But no, this is the way God sees these people. Do you know, I've never had problems with angry farm animals. Have you? I know there's people in this room that have. I'm sure it's annoying, but it's hardly the end of the world. And that's what we're looking at the moment. When God sees Putin, when he sees Xi, who's over in China, and he strangely looks like a panda. He looks like Pooh Bear, in fact. You're not allowed. Listen, this is how insecure the man is. He can't even have a picture of Pooh Bear in China, or they will arrest you. But when he sees Putin, he sees Xi, he sees Netanyahu over in Israel, he sees President Biden, Trump, whatever. God sees, oh, I got some angry farm animals here. I got to take care of them because they're all acting crazy. That's how he sees it. Now, what does that tell us? To God, they are nothing. They mean nothing. They have no significance to the Almighty in his great plan of his kingdom that will never end. Do you know, we attribute leaders with great names, with power, and we think they're, have cunning and geopolitical strategies, when all of them are but footnotes to the history of Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ. They're nothing. They are absolutely nothing. They are dust, and they will return to dust. That's what God says. They're nothing. Not only does he say that, God says, I think it's in Isaiah, that he sees the end from the beginning. These people that think they know that they're grasping power in this world, that they have the knowledge to get it done, God is the only one who knows. And not only does God know, he loves us. And he's the only one with real power. Now, what does God know? We say, well, God knows everything. Yes, of course, yes. But everything's not enough for us. We can't grasp everything. Do you know there's 1.6 billion sparrows? They estimate on the earth today. 1.6 billion sparrows. Life expectancy of your average sparrow is 3 years. I thought it would be shorter, but they're looking at getting 3 years. They got a high mortality rate. Only 20% of them survive from when they hatch. They survive 45 to 65% of the time they're going to survive in the wild before they die. What's the turnover rate for sparrows? Because you got ones that are dying, you got ones that are just hatching. How's the numbers? What's the fluctuation of it all? Does God know? He knows. He knows. Listen, He knows every one. 1.6 billion. And they're hatching, they're dying, they're hatching, they're dying, they're hatching, they're dying. Ask AI if he knows. God knows. God. Every one of them. Well, that's hard to believe in. No, that's what Jesus said. And do you know what? God doesn't break a sweat knowing it. Doesn't ruffle him. That's the God that we worship. If knowledge is power, then guess who has it all? God has. God has. Do you know, if God knows the intimate details of a sparrow's life, you think he knows the intimate details of yours? That's what Jesus is saying in that text. In Matthew 10, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny, and not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father, but even the hairs of your head are numbered. Go ask AI that. Hey, AI, how many hairs do I have in my head? How many should be there? Can't help you. God knows. God knows. And then he says this, fear not, therefore you are more valued than many sparrows. God knows the intimate details of your life. And according to Jesus, how should we respond? Fear not. This is not fear some. This is not fear a little occasionally. Fear when it really gets bad, but when it's not really bad, just be at peace. That's not what he's saying here. He's not saying that. He's not saying fear occasionally. He's not saying fear when you feel like it. He's not saying fear when everybody else does. He says, fear not. Because you're in the hands of the Heavenly Father. He's got all the power. He knows everything. We're Christians. We don't do fear. Because we know the one that's on the throne. And if God's seen the history of the USA laid out before him, and he has, he's seen it from the beginning of time. He knows what's coming in this election. And if he's not worried, why should I be? Why should you be? If God knows the number of hairs on your head and what you're going to ask before you ask it, he knows what you're going to ask before you ask it. Matthew chapter 5. And if he knows that, then he's not worried about your life and my life and our lives. He's not sweating. Why should I be? The supper brings us back to the crucifixion. The supper brings us back to the murder of Jesus. And in Acts 4:27 through 28, Peter says this, indeed, Herod and Pontius Pilate met together with the Gentiles and the people of Israel in this city to conspire against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed. Men have been conspiring against Jesus for a long time, but listen to what Peter said. They did what your power and will had decided beforehand should happen. Did we see that? Oh, they planned. Oh, they plotted. Oh, the Jews says we'll get rid of Jesus and we'll get a hold of the power. The Romans did the same. Get rid of him. He's in the way of our power. And they conspired together to do what men are trying to do in this country, what they're trying to do throughout the West. And Peter says they did what your power and will had decided beforehand should happen. Of course there's free will. Of course they're making choices. But God is so far ahead of them, they think they're winning the race. Why did the leaders of Israel conspire with the Romans? Well, as we said, to grab power and take control. It was like one day the farm animals decided, you know what? We've had enough of the Browns. Let's get together, boys. We're taking over. And what a bad decision that was for them. The supper says God's not worried about the plots and plans of men, because when they plotted and planned before the crucifixion, he buried them with it. Buried them. It was his plan. So if God's not worried, why should we be? The supper says that God loves us. He knows every detail of your life and my life and our life together, and he's not worried about our lives. So in light of Christ crucified and raised from the dead, do not fear what's coming our way.